The event is jointly presented by Indian Lawyers Association and KELP HR. Myself, Madhura, Executive Director of ILA, Indian Lawyers Association. Here is a bit of information about what ILA is. So, ILA works for serving its members through various programs and services. And we have some support initiatives like a mentorship or internship programs for lawyers and law students. And basically, we offer a platform for networking. We work on a chapter based model, and ILA has about 40 chapters currently. So if you belong to a city, if you see the name of your city on the screen, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll connect you to the chapter. And if your city name is not here, still reach out to us and we'll make sure to have a chapter where you could actively get involved. So I'll hand over to Smita, co-founder and CEO of Kelpachar, who is also the moderator of this session. Smita, over to you.
Thank you so much, Madhura, and thank you for this amazing opportunity. My name is Smita. I just one request to all of you: if you all are not speaking, please go on mute because there is a little bit of background noise, and it will be a good experience for all of us if we ensure that we take care of each other, right? So, KELP-HR, we started 7 years back. The year this law came by, Prevention of the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. Okay, we are very proud that we did start this work exactly around the same year. Okay, my name is Smita. I am one of the co-founders. Today, I am very excited to present to you a panel of some eminent lawyers. I have always been an non-legal person working in this field. Many a time we got pushed back saying that maybe you don't have a legal experience, you don't have a legal knowledge. How are you even advocating a law? What I realized during my experiences, this is about human beings. This is about sensitivity. This is about creating a safe workplaces, not required a legal knowledge, but we have to ensure that we work hand in glove with this group of lawyers. So today I'm so proud and excited to present to you 4 amazing people here on the panel. First person I present to you is Aditya Mehta. He's the independent law practice professional for last 13 years. He's the principal associate at IC, Universal Legal Advocates and Solicitors. He is also litigation department head of IC Universal Legal in Ahmedabad office. Welcome, Aditya. I have Akshita Ummat, who is associate at IC Universal Legal Delhi, involved in civil and criminal litigation matters. And I have Prakash Dhopatkarji, practicing advocate in High Court, suits, review, revision, appeals, writs, original and appellate side for 30 years. Wow. And in Supreme Court for 3 years. Amazing, Dhopatkarji. He's the ILA president of Borivali chapter in Mumbai. And I have CJ Jobson, a practicing lawyer on original civil, criminal and commercial jurisdiction of Bombay High Court and the court subordinate to it since last 13 years. Amazing. In Supreme Court of India, Kerala High Court, Goa bench of Bombay High Court, Ahmedabad and Calcutta since the last 3 years. You have done Bharat Brahman, Mr. Johnson. So welcome aboard all of you. I am going to hand over the panel first to Joe. Okay. So Joe has had amazing experience right from the beginning. Okay. When the whole 2013 Act was getting formulated, right? So, earnest request to you, Joe, is that can you tell us or share with us the experience when the law was getting formulated, right? Pre-law and during the law. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, Joe, go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. The most violent crimes against women around the world is rape. And rape is understood the world over as a sexual crime. But in India, rape is not actually a sexual crime. Rape is a crime which is done for the purpose of teaching a lesson to one's enemies. And that is exactly what had happened in Vishaka's case. In the early 90s, to be more precise, in 1992, a social worker was raped by, her name was, she's identified as Banwari Devi. She was raped by Gujjar landlords of Rajasthan because she had opposed child marriage and was instrumental in stopping child marriage of a few girls in Rajasthan. Because she was belonging to a pot making this thing pottery potters. They are actually like we have kumbhars in Maharashtra. She belonged to that clan, which is understood to be a low caste. And because she was a low caste and she had the guts to stop the landlords from performing child marriage, she was taught a lesson by gang raping her. And because these were high clouted landlords, they were well respected people in the society, they were let off by the Sessions Court as well as by the Rajasthan High Court. When they were acquitted without any charges, women's organization from all around the world, they got together and they petitioned the Supreme Court. And that is how the Supreme Court comes into picture and takes hold of the matter. And subsequently, in 1997, Supreme Court delivered a landmark judgment in which all these people were held guilty, and a few guidelines were issued, which was which is now known as the Vishaka guidelines. Now, how the name Vishaka came to be applicable to this particular case, when the name of the victim was Banwari Devi, Vishaka was the title given to the large number of public interest litigations which came to be filed in support of that rape victim. Now, after the Vishaka guidelines were framed by the Supreme Court in 1997, there was a hope in the mind of the Supreme Court that the Parliament of India will soon enact a law for the purpose of codifying these guidelines and converting them into a law. But Parliament did not move until the year 2007. And in the year 2007, the first draft bill was moved. And thereafter, it took almost 10 years for the bill to get passed into a law. And it was in the year 2012 that ultimately it got passed from both the houses of the parliament. And in 2013, it got the assent of the president. And a few months, 2 months thereafter, the law came into effect. The statute came into effect. And that is the basic of how Vishaka judgment came into effect into a law. Now, before 1997, that is before the Supreme Court had delivered this landmark judgment, what was the position of law? It was only the IPC which was at the rescue for any kind of sexual offenses or any kind of what we call sexual harassment or anything. Now, it is quite ironic to note that after a woman was gang raped, what the courts came out with was a guideline on how to prevent sexual harassment. There was no guideline conceived at that particular point of time to how to prevent crimes like rape, etc. Even today, there is no serious research done by the government bodies for the purpose of understanding why rape is committed, how it can be prevented, what could be the legislative measures to curtail rape, etc. But we today have a few amendments in the IPC, which, as a legal practitioner, as a defense lawyer, I find nothing more than graphic illustrations of the body parts of women for the purpose of explaining what is what and what is it done and how is it done, etc. There is, I don't find any what you call any added advantage which it has got in preventing the rape or in addressing the plight of the rape victim. In India, we do not have any dearth of law. We have got laws for each and every subject. What we lack is the application of law. So, as I said, before the Vishaka judgment was passed, we had IPC sections of 354 and 509, which was pertaining to offenses related to appraising the modesty of women and of giving intentional insult, etc., to women. Uh, Now, even today, in the year 2020, it is a sorry state of affairs that many of our corporate houses, mostly the Indian companies, the MNCs had already acted upon when the 97 judgment was out. Even today, our most of our companies have not yet implemented the mandates laid down in the act or the guidelines given by the Supreme Court pursuant to the Vishakha case. So, so the end result is we are still staggering with Section 354 and 509 of IPC when it comes to dealing with women. So this is a brief picture which I have to give you about the entire scenario. Now,
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. That is quite exhaustive because we really need to understand from where did this emerge, right? It didn't come out of thin air. There was some serious crime behind it. Unfortunately, I think as a country, we are known to take action only after some really bad things happen. Okay, so thank you for that background. I will come back to you. I will just move to Mr. Prakash Dhopadkar. Mr. Dhopadkar, if you could throw a little bit of light on what are those major judgments or case laws which has come towards this law, which is quite landmark and quite important for us in this phase, right? Like Joe said, that it took us from 91 to 97 to 2013, the entire journey, and we are now sitting in 2020. So what are those progresses over a period of time that has happened for us to strengthen this law further?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. See, when we talk of the Vishakha judgment, and without Vishakha judgment, we cannot even touch the topic or dare to touch this topic. And this Vishakha judgment has given a flow to one thinking. This Vishakha judgment was based on basically fundamental rights. Article 14 guarantees the equality before law. Everybody is equal. And first of all, today is 26th of November, a Constitution Day. And I must wish everybody for that. And we cannot think of Constitution without remembering this day every year. So this is Article 14 guarantees the equality. Then Article 14, where the root goes. Article 14 is a prohibition of discrimination on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. So here exactly we come on the topic of sex. Now when this judgment was passed, of course we had this Article 15, then 19 is uh, regarding the occupation. Everybody is having a right to carry on the occupation which he desires, but it should not be the violative of any of the laws. Then there will be certain other implications of it. So occupation is there, so there will be occupational hazards. Then this sex also could be, there could be the discrimination there also, and this was there. And when it was thought at that time, what was considered was the human rights. What is guaranteed under the human rights? What are the human rights? Because we are the parties to the various human rights conventions, and we are bound by those conventions, and we have to implement the tenacity of those conventions. And human rights, section 2D of the Protection of Human Rights Act describes what is human rights, and that has been discussed in this judgment. So this judgment was based on the constitutional elements or the constitutional provisions as well as the provisions in the human rights. So what is this section 2D of the human rights? Because even laws may be insufficient, but unless and until we understand the human rights element or the definition in a clear sense, then everything will get solved and we can go to the route of finding solutions to all problems. So human rights basically means the rights relating to the life, liberty, equality and dignity of the individual guaranteed by the constitution. When we talk of article 21, which is discussed here also and in various other matters also, what does article 21 means? Article 21 means right to life, but it doesn't mean only right to life and or right to have a livelihood. What it means is a dignified life. A citizen of India must be allowed to have a dignified right, because this article 21 is guaranteed to a citizen, not to a corporation. If it is a corporation, then corporation there is no livelihood or right of dignity. The different provisions are there. So it is the individual who is guaranteed by the constitution or embodied in the international covenants. So international covenants developments often take place, and those developments are also to be taken into consideration, and those should be enforceable by courts in India. Now, when it could be enforceable by courts in India, either by constitutional provisions or by making a law. And therefore, whatever guidelines have been given in this judgment have become a law. There is no deviation from this judgment in either of the provisions of the Act 13 Act. Then I will go to the another provision of the act, which is of course discussed here also, the definition of what is sexual harassment. That is very relevant. And every time whenever an aggrieved woman makes a complaint against the respondent, so what will be seen before coming to the conclusion that whether there is a sexual harassment or not, what is seen is what is the definition. Then what is definition that is given in the Vishakha judgment as well as in various other case laws also, and even in the act also, which is copied from here. And what does it mean is that sexual harassment includes, what this means is a provision is an inclusive. It doesn't say what it means. That means it is an exhaustive. It is not a restrictive. As and when the society is developing, even the accused persons don't feel it otherwise, but they are also trying to find it out the way out to come out of the clutches of the law. And thereby the definition gets enlarged. So what it says is it includes, and what it includes, physical contact and advances. This has been considered by all courts in all the judgments. I will come to those judgments later on in a nutshell. Then demand or request of sexual favors. See, physical contact or advances, here there is a judgment of a Delhi High Court. in one case where they say not all physical contacts can be held as sexual harassment. No. See, in a criminal law, there is an element of that is mens rea. There has to be the mens rea, intention. But this is, though the criminal provisions are incorporated herein, but this is a civil nature. This itself provision is of a civil nature because this is pertaining to the organization or pertaining to the work that is being carried out or at a workplace, and the civil provisions are there. And therefore they say that not all physical contacts, there has to be, see, embarrassment. Again, this is very wide concept. If a lady feels that she is an embarrassed, she should not feel embarrassed. There may not be an intent. One may go out of the clutches of the criminal law that there is no intent to have some kind of gestures that were made to offend you, but still she feels this one embarrassed, then she is having the right. Because here in this case it was what happened in Delhi High Court, because that she was the employee of CSIR, and in that employment somebody touched her colleague held her hands or during the discussion, or there were altercations, and therefore she filed a complaint. And as per the provision, she has to file the complaint with the ICC. I'm not going to that angle of it. And in this, Delhi High Court came to the conclusion that all the physical contacts cannot be held as sexual harassment. Then demand or request for sexual favors. Then sexually colored remarks. Say sexually colored remarks is a very wide concept. Because whatever remarks are passed on, maybe passing remarks, but one should not be offended by such remarks, and there should not be sexuality involved in it or some kind of inclination towards sexuality. Then showing pornography in all sense, that need not be discussed, but wherever there is a pornography shown or it is exhibited in any manner, maybe by publication or any way, then that also is included. And very wide is any other welcome physical, verbal or non-verbal contacts of sexual nature. Unwelcome. So your behavior should not be such that it will not be acceptable to the other sex. That means certainly whoever would be. So this is the broad definition of this sexual harassment, what is. And all the judgments are revolving on this sexual harassment. You will find when men and women are working at various places in an organization, sometimes the altercations, as we have seen, is taking place. Sometimes there could be somebody wants to involve because the promotion issues are there or there. So there is a misuse also sometimes. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Go ahead, Mr. Go
Yes.
ahead. There was somebody.
Okay. Then I am going to the judgment of the Bombay High Court. Vishakha judgment, I will say it is reported in 1997, 3 crimes, Supreme Court 188. That is the citation of it. Vishakha and others versus State of Rajasthan. This is then I will go to the Bombay High Court judgment. This is a very good judgment in case of a police only. This is a very relevant judgment because even the police are not left out from this, or the police organization is not left out from this kind of an offenses, because that is also a workplace, and that offense also takes place at workplace. So this judgment was reported in 2017 Supreme into bracket Bombay 1914 or 2018 4 BCR page number 42 or 2018 1 Maharashtra Law Journal 949. In this case, there was one lady employee subordinate to the petitioner, and she was posted as a superintendent of jail, Central Jail, Thane, and she made a complaint. So against the petitioner who was superintendent of jail, Central Jail, Thane, she made a complaint against him, and she leveled the allegations of sexual harassment. So this is a very vital definition which is to be touched everywhere, that it should, that act should fall in that because this section 2 is also to 2n is also to be read along with 3, because there are some other parts are also which will form the act of sexual harassment. So she filed a complaint, and there was respondent number 3 who was at that time DIG prison. He was appointed in that as a disciplinary authority. And in this judgment, what was there? You see, ICC is having certain powers which are very limited powers. That is section 12, because in this judgment, all the sections of the Sexual Harassment Act have been elaborately discussed and dealt with. And when we talk of this section 12, because section 4 makes a provision for constitution of internal complaints committee, and there is also local committee. I am not coming on that local because here we were concerned with the ICC only, and ICC is having certain powers. When ICC is conducting an inquiry, because inquiry into the complaint under section 11, this committee has to inquire into the complaint, and section 12 provides for action during the pendency. Now, what action during the pendency they can take? There are very few actions they can, and they are very limited. The power of ICC is very limited. What they say is transfer the aggrieved woman or the respondent to any other workplace. She will demand a transfer because she will feel that she will be harassed there for making a complaint, and it would not be easy for her, or it would not be useful for her to stay there and to invite something else. And otherwise, she may go on leave. So they can grant leave to the aggrieved woman up to a period of 3 months, or grant such other relief to the aggrieved woman as may be prescribed, and leave granted will be considered, will not be counted in her regular leave. So this is a very limited power. But in this case, what happened? This particular
Prakashji,
yeah.
thank you very much. I think you have covered many of it. Okay, what really excited me, and as a non-legal person, which really hits the chord, is the sexual harassment includes. Okay, it's an inclusive definition. It is not restrictive definition, which I wouldn't have paid attention and I wouldn't have known. So amazing takeaway from what you just said. Another important thing that you spoke about was impact and not the intent. I think that is very, very powerful, right? A person can feel humiliated. So it could be from his side that there is no intention, but if a person is feeling humiliated, she can complain. Another very important aspect that you touched upon is about that all physical contact is not necessarily sexual harassment. I think that's very, very brilliant. I'm sorry, I know I'm going to cut you a little bit here because we have loads to cover and we can go on, but we have limited time. So I'm going to move to Aditya. Aditya, what, according to you, are those, important or major features of the Act? If you could touch upon, you've heard Prakash, he touched upon some various points, but if you could take it from there and take us through few major impacts and the working rules. If you could touch upon that aspect, will be brilliant. Yeah.
Sure. Hi, thank you all. So let me explain. Now you know Mr. Prakash ji has explained what constitutes the act of sexual harassment. So I will not go into that, and I'll just give, without even mentioning the provisions, I'll just give you a major features of the 2013 Act. It is basically an act which defines sexual harassment at workplace and creates a mechanism for redressal of the complaints. And the act also not only provides or creates a mechanism of redressal of complaint, but the act also provides and safeguards against false or malicious complaints. So that act covers both the features. The second thing, what the major feature is, the act also covers the concept of quid pro quo, which means a favor or an advantage granted in return of something. So the act also covers this kind of quid pro quo harassment and hostile work environment as a form of sexual harassment if it occurs in connection with an act on behavior of sexual harassment. The act, as both the panelists before me have stated quite well, that it covers the definition of aggrieved woman. Now, who is the aggrieved woman, which is also defined under the act, and it is an extremely wide definition which covers all women irrespective of the age, employment status, whether in an organized or unorganized sector, public or private, and covers clients, customers, domestic workers also, which the Vishaka judgment only used to expressly cover government, public sector, and private enterprises. Now, because of this, the scope has widened up, and the law has evolved to include as many, like Mr. Prakash said, that it's an inclusive definition, not an exact definition. The most important thing which is covered under the Act, the main feature is the definition of workplace. Now, the workplace in the Vishaka guidelines were traditionally office setup where there is a clear employee-employer relationship. But now this act goes much further to include like organizations, department, office, branch units, etc. In public and private sectors, organized, unorganized, hospitals are included, nursing homes, educational institutes, sports institutes, stadiums, sports complex, or any place visited by an employee during the course of the employment, including transportation. Even non-traditional workplaces which involve like say telecommunicating is also covered under this law. So the act has evolved so far as Vishaka is, it was a very limited workplace definition, but now because of this act, it has been evolved. The act also defines a committee which is required to be formed. There is a certain time limit where the committee has to come up with, has to conclude its investigation or inquiry based on that. So that has also been defined. I'll also go just after the basic things. I'll also go how the committee is formed and what are the procedures for filing a complaint, and till from the start till the end. I'll just very briefly take you that, but just in a moment I'll cover up all this. The very interesting thing is, so this committee is required to be, it's called the internal complaints committee, and which has to be there in each and every offices or branch which has 10 or more employees. So if any office or a branch particularly has 10 or more employees, there has to be an internal committee. There are certain, the act has also said who can be the members of the internal committee, which also I'll just briefly touch the thing. And the internal complaints committee has given the powers of civil court for gathering evidence. So the committee has powers like in the trial court where you have inspection and discovery of documents. This committee also has the same power where they can gather evidence in order to decide. They also have powers, or they are required to provide conciliation before initiating inquiry. there are this is completely confidential. The act provides that it has to be completely confidential, and anyone who breaks the confidentiality clause has a penal provision to the employer. Penalties are prescribed for that. And so this is the general overall act. Vishaka was at that, it was 1997, but since the time has evolved, the law also, though it took so many years, but ultimately it has evolved to give a wider meaning of the current scenario. If I may say, that I have stated that each and every office or a branch which has more than 10 employees needs to say make an internal complaint committee. Now, broadly, I will say like the committee consists of who all. So one, there has to be a presiding officer who is a woman employed at senior level at a workplace from amongst all the employees. So the presiding officer should be a woman employed at a senior level at a workplace. If though that senior level women is not there, then other branch they can nominate for other offices and everything. Then there should be members not less than two from the employees, preferably committed to the cause of women or who have experience in social work or have legal knowledge. Now, what does this mean is there has to be not less than two members who are from the employees itself, or who have, and it can be an external social worker or a lawyer, a female lawyer, say, per se. Then there has to be one member from amongst non-governmental organization or association committed to the cause of women or a person familiar with the issues relating to sexual harassment. There has to be one member who is not a part of this organization or any non-government organization, or any it can be from amongst any non-government organizations, associations. Yes. And the committee which is formed, at least one half of the total members shall be women. Now, this act is a gender bias act. It only says sexual harassment for women. There is nothing for men. So if the committee is dealing with the sexual harassment against the women, the act itself or the rules itself suggest that at least one half of the total members shall be women. So this is the basically committee. Now I'll just quickly look at the simple procedure. Like, for example, if an employee or a female employee wants to file a complaint, he or like she should know like what are the procedures, how to file. There are various things. So basically, any aggrieved women can make a complaint in writing of sexual harassment of workplace within a period of 3 months from the date of incident. And in case the series of incident happened within the period of the 3 months from the date of last incident. This can be extended for a further period of 3 months, but the committee has to give reasons in writing. So total of 6 months to file a complaint. The complainant, now this is, I don't know, this is too much of work for the aggrieved person, but like the act says that you have to submit 6 copies of the written complaint should be submitted. So it is not just you file a complaint with all the evidence together. Now, if they have some problem in writing, the presiding officer or any other member of the ICC may help them to write the complaint. Now, any complaint which is received by the member has to be immediately forwarded to the presiding officer, and this must be notified to the other committee members that a complaint has been received at the earliest and not later than 3 days from the receipt of the complaint, and a meeting should be called for discussing the matter. Thereafter, the committee shall discover the jurisdiction and all that. The notice, the important part is once the complaint is received and discussions are held, a notice is to be issued to the accused person or the respondent in this case within 7 working days of the receipt of the complaint, and 10 days is given for him or to submit his reply. So they'll give all the assistance, and then they have to initiate the inquiry. Now, if there are any settlement in between, they have to record the settlement. First, when the committee starts, before the inquiry starts, the committee has a job of starting the conciliation process, like whether that the dispute or the claim can be conciliated or not. If not, the committee has been given all the powers of the trial court to get all the evidence. And once the preliminary inquiry, they have powers also to cross-examine the witnesses, like the same as the trial court. And once the committee was of the opinion that that respondent is, say, the prima facie case against him is that yes, he has committed an offense, there are certain what do you call recommendations or nature of action which has been provided by the act, which is giving asking him to give a written apology. It all depends about the graveness of the offense. Warning, reprimand, withholding of promotion, withholding of pay rise or increment, undergoing a conciliation session, carrying out community services, terminating the respondent from the services, or any other punishment according to the service and rules applicable. Now, there is a moral duty because some sexual harassment has also been included in the Indian Penal Code now with section 354A. It is the duty of the committee to report such an offense if they come to a prima facie to the nearest the district committee or something. So these are just a brief, so that there are more details to it where you can give a monetary what do you call the monetary compensation to the women apart from the other things. What Mr. Prakash ji said, that there are certain interim measures, those are all in details, but just an overall view. This is the entire process how the committee gives, and the act and the rules provides for the same. And if there are any if the aggrieved woman or the respondent is aggrieved by, he or she has the power or the thing to appeal against such before the courts or the tribunals. So this kind of entire act and the entire structure along with the rules, it has been provided in 2013 act.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aditya. That was quite exhaustive and quick too. Akshita, I come to you for what has changed since 2013 to 2020. What do you think from employers' perspective they can do? Okay, what do you think according to the employers are the best practices that is followed in various organizations from the legal aspects that you look at, Akshita? Can you tell us that?
Thank you so much, first of all. And my part, I'll be covering majorly upon the prevention of this thing, right? As Smita ma'am also said, that, it is more of sensitization. It has to be, it's about human psyche. We have to understand that you have to become more sensitive towards the equality of women. If they're coming to the workplace, there has to be some kind of balance, right? And this sexual discrimination comes into place because of the power differential, majorly what we come across, right? So it's imperative to understand what all other measures, preventive measures, we can take up as employers. I speak totally on the behalf of the employers, because I think it's totally a lose-lose situation for an employer, because that guy is training the employee, both the employees, and because of such unwanted things, he is losing the reputation of the company, and he's losing the trained employees. So there's a lot of resource wastage, I would say. So plus there's a huge responsibility enshrined under section 19 of the act, that there are the duties of the employer basically to prevent these things. Even the act in first place says it has to be preventive, prohibited, and then redressed if that cannot be prevented. All right, so quickly, I just have enumerated like 6 points wherein we will be talking about what all can be the suggestive things, the best practices being followed by the employers, how they can avoid happening of such events, because it should be deeply condemned at every workplace, because it disturbs the professional as well as the personal life of a woman working, right? So first is developing and implementing a no tolerance harassment policy, that there'll be like a zero tolerance for sexual harassment happening at the workplace, and the employers have to be out and loud and very clear while signing up the employment agreements with their employees, that any such happening of the event might, whatever consequences they want to enumerate, they can do that, so that it's from the very beginning, when the person is entering your organization, he knows that they take this thing very seriously, right? And as Mr. Jove also said, that it's the people are still not compliant. The companies have formed the internal complaints committees, but they have not, they're not functioning, they're not reporting. So it's very important that they have the implementation of the policy in the black and white, in the spirit of the law. It's also not just on the papers that we have in internal committee, and we are just, having meetings. You have to actually make people aware of the fact, which will be the second convergence to this preventive measures, that creating awareness is very much important. So whenever we have these employee awareness sessions, generally this specific act is taken very lightly. It's taken as it's generally mocked upon, that people have loose talks, they have very casual talks, which sometimes turn out to be the cases of reported cases of sexual harassment. So creating awareness is very much important, wherein you enumerate that, if this kind of behavior happens, this might result in filing a case against you, because most of the times people come up with these excuses, that we did not even know that probably this can be covered under the act, or this can be termed as sexual harassment. So creating awareness through having awareness sessions, or having the display of posters as at your workplace, can possibly make people more sensitized and aware about the existence of this specific act and the policy of the workplace. Then providing proper training to the internal committee members, because what happens is, like, if, for supposedly, if we have an IT company, they cannot be expected to, like Smita ma'am also said, they cannot be expected to have legal knowledge, right? So it's imperative, because you'll be taking decisions for somebody's life, right? And getting acquainted with the act and the nuances of the act is very important. So I personally suggest that all the companies, whosoever are having this internal committee in place, they should have orientation programs for their internal committee members, so that they know the inquiry proceedings, how can scenario based studies should be done with them, so that they can be more prepared if any such situation comes into picture in their organization. Then a very important thing is a non-fraternization policy has to be introduced from the employer's end, because as I reiterate myself, that it has to be more preventive in nature. So if you have a no dating policy in your organization from the very beginning, you tell it that we will not be entertaining any scorn relationship coming into picture, because 50% of the cases come in that people are going around with each other, and they all of a sudden feel that they're not on good terms with each other, and then the sexual harassment cases come into picture. So it should be very much clear from the employers, and then any of the cases budding out of these love-hate relationships going on in the organization will not be entertained by the internal complaints committee. Then many people might disagree on that, but I personally feel that, and even the employers should stress upon this point, that there should be a strict dress code, right? Except for certain, I would say, professions, there there are chances wherein people can be dressed inappropriately in organizations, and that can basically result in any kind of passing of lewd comments or so-called casual talks, which resulted to sour complaints coming in. And then it's important to encourage the employees to have a kind of professional behavior, because uh, it generally starts, the sexual harassment thing basically starts, nobody goes into the grievous form of sexual harassment all of a sudden. If you talk about the corporate culture also, it generally buds into, we're talking casually, and all of a sudden there's something which was unacceptable or unwelcome, as Prakashji said, by any lady, and she decides to file a complaint. So if we have one one kind of professional behavior, or you can say we maintain the decorum of our organization, then there are less chances of happening of such events, and we will be largely able to evade such things. And as I started with this note only, that it's very hurtful for the lady who is coming into a workplace to work and getting such kind of environment, because it breaks the professional as well as the personal capacities and the personal confidence of the woman who's coming in. I would not be gender biased, and I would just attach one statement to this, that this should also be considered from the perspective of the cases where we get the malicious complaints or the false complaints, right? So if there's an accused, right, it is going to affect the professional and personal life of that person also, if he has been falsely trapped into the clutches of law just because there was a kind of a frustration in the lady who wanted to file a complaint. I'm just talking about the malicious complaints. So it should be thought both ways. It's not only the sensitization from the end of a female, that there should be a soft corner for the female. There should be a soft corner for a male also, that he should not be put, just because you have a female oriented law, he should not be put to so much of wrath and wrongdoing. So this should be the female employees, I would say, they should be watchful of using and misusing this specific act. So
Thank you, Akshita. That is brilliant. And I really take few key things, that it is employers' responsibility to do work. In this, not only employers, I feel every employee, every citizen is responsible, okay, for this act to work beautifully. Okay. I have one basic question here out of what Akshita just said. Okay. The whole base of this law is principle of natural justice, right? So, Mr. Dhopadkar, Joe, what do you have to say about that? Mr. Dhopadkar, you'll have to unmute yourself if you're trying to say something. Okay. Principle of natural justice. Okay. This keeps coming back to us really hard. Okay. What do you think?
See, the principle of natural justice is a very wide concept, and it is a very relevant. In a principle of natural justice, what does it mean? What is guaranteed under Constitution is the equality before law and the justice to all. That the preamble says that justice to all, and therefore the natural justice is to be done to all, not only to the aggrieved person or to the respondent. It is to be done to all, and the principles of natural justice are the embodiment of our Constitution only. That means the constitutional principles are to be strictly adhered to and followed. That means the opportunity of hearing is to be given. The opportunity of hearing, it does not mean the sham hearing. Sometimes the hearing would be a sham hearing, or sometimes there has to be the proper notice given to the person to allow him to attend, or complainant also should be done the natural justice, that she should be given the ample opportunity to put forth her complaint, and therefore there is a provision in the act itself that ICC can help the complainant if she is unable to write the complaint. Then so that is based on the principle of natural justice in nutshell.
Right. Thank you so much. Joe, you want to add something here?
As far as my observation is concerned about natural justice, you might be aware of the latest episode which we all witnessed in the Supreme Court when the Justice Gogoi was facing an allegation of sexual harassment. What he did, he constituted an inquiry commission, or no, a committee of inquiry, and he himself sat in that inquiry, and the natural justice was given to the victim. We all saw. That is what is happening today in the country. And if that is what the courts call natural justice, then I have no option. I have no comments. Thank you.
That under the belt. Yeah, it's really
Good observation.
yes, that's really sad. Really, I mean, that was a failure to justice. I might have to say that. Okay, and yes, if a Supreme Court judge is doing that, the Chief Justice of India is doing that, it's a big question mark. But whatever said and done, I feel it is all our responsibility to work towards it. It shouldn't be that one person is doing that, so I should be following it. I think it comes from our own choices that we make. Yeah. Sorry. Moving ahead, there are loads of questions that is coming up. There are questions which came up when you all were sent a registration. So I'm going to quickly try and read those questions for these eminent folks to help us respond to. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask that question also is fine. In the meantime, I'll just pull up first question, whether members of internal committee have to be replaced after completion of 3 years, or are they eligible for immediate reappointment? That's one of the questions.
I can take that question. So
Yes.
it says that the term of a person is you cannot be reappointed. You have to be says, as per my opinion, after the completion of 3 years, the members have to rotate. You cannot have second chance of employment, second chance to be the part of the committee. After 3 years are over, you have to. Then after the next tenure or after the another 3 years, yes, I think you might be able to come back. But yes, after 3 years, you'll have to change.
Yeah, anybody has any opposing comment? Because generally lawyers have two different thoughts. So I would love to hear that. Okay, we are all on same page. Great. The next question is, Miss ex-employee of Messrs. XYZ and Co. Chartered Accountant visits premises of ABC Limited. She is sexually harassed by one of the directors of ABC Limited. Whether IC of ABC Limited has the jurisdiction over the matter of IC, or Messrs. XYZ and company will have jurisdiction over the matter. I can take that question. According to me, it is the respondent company which has the jurisdiction to the matter, because they will be executing the whole outcome. Lawyers, you'll have to tell me whether it's right or wrong. If I'm wrong, please recommend.
Yeah, I completely. Sorry.
Okay, now carry on. Go on.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Smita, because what happens is one of the outcome is the termination. So that if the company is done, like if the accused company or the accused or the complainant company has the jurisdiction over the matter, he would not be able to terminate some other employee. So in sense and as per the rules framed, I think the jurisdiction would be of the respondent's company. Mr. Prakash,
I beg to differ with this. Because what is the very intent of the act is the workplace. Now, what is the workplace? The workplace is the place where the offense has taken place. And here it is not only the termination of an employee that is the only mode of punishment. There could be the financial also implications involved to it, and she can be compensated. So therefore, where the offense has taken place, not where she is working. She was working with the chartered accountant where there may not be more than 10 persons also perhaps. And where she has even gone and she was offended, whether there were 10 persons or more or not. And otherwise, if there were not 10 persons, there will be no ICC. Then she will be having the different forum where she can approach. So all these are to be looked into.
So assuming, Prakashji, if they have 10 or more employees in both the organization, then what is the
then also where the workplace, because what happens, what is the this one here there is a definition. If we go to the clause of definition, sexual harassment, workplace, workplace includes, again, because where the offense has taken place at a workplace, not at the workplace of her employer, that is the chartered accountant, but where she had gone to execute her work, and there is the workplace where that offense has taken place. So that place is to be considered rather than the place of office of the chartered accountant.
Okay.
That is my interpretation, because otherwise we will have to go to the case law on that.
Yeah, agreed. That is,
So,
I think we are
yeah.
saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Prakash, we are saying the same thing.
Okay,
that,
then you are right.
Yes, we are saying the same
Then
thing.
absolutely,
Okay.
then it is correct.
Yeah. So no, but now the question is, you are insisting on the definition of workplace.
Yeah.
So if it has happened in the victim's workplace, okay, then will victim's IC come in play?
Yeah, victim's workplace, where if it had happened in victim's workplace, then that organization.
Okay, so it's a different point of view that you have, because the question then is that if it has happened in victim's workplace and victim's IC will come together and try the proceeding, I mean, to carry on the proceedings, then the outcome of it, okay, if they decide that the respondent has to be terminated, will the other...
Termination is not the only punishment.
I'm saying it was a grave. It was something that he did very grave, very serious offense.
Yeah. Because what happens, you see, if that respondent is found guilty, even prima facie or otherwise, then that ICC has to report the offense. Even the victim is having the right to report the offense. Suppose it is the sexual harassment and she wants to make the complaint under the IPC also. Then where the offense has taken place? The offense has taken place the place which she visited, and that police station will have the jurisdiction. Likewise, ICC is having the power to report the offense to the concerned police station to lodge FIR under 509. Then where that FIR is to be lodged? FIR to be lodged where the police, in which police station jurisdiction this place is situated.
Okay.
Yeah. Therefore.
So there are two different opinions. So I'll let people.
So the lawyers are differing.
Yes.
They maintain the status quo.
Okay. So the next question I'll move to: when law takes too much time, how can some measures be devised to help the victim?
See, the legal mechanism is always a time consuming. As you say, the principles of natural justice are to be followed, and as my learned friend has rightly pointed out, of course, we will not discuss on that. But if really natural justice is to be done, then it cannot be hushed up. Everybody has to be given equal opportunity, and it is not something like a media trial that can be finished it off in a few seconds, because when somebody has seen, then why it is to be deferred? So the law will take its own course. Therefore, there is a maxim that law will take its own course because it has got the set procedure. The CPC is there, CRPC is there, Evidence Act is there. It is not something that somebody means to just say, give some example, somebody has sent somebody shooting, then why do you conduct a trial?
Yeah.
So therefore, we will have to bear with all these things. If
so,
we want
I just have one point of view to this question, that there is an interim measure that can be taken, right? A leave
can be granted.
Yeah, I think there is some problem. Meeta's connection, but yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there is an interim relief that can be provided to the victim. It could be transferred to a different location. Okay, all that I'm sure that can be done to take care of the victim and whatever required to protect her. Okay, so that can be done. There are a lot of questions flowing in from the participants. So if y'all want to unmute yourself and ask a question, please go ahead and do that.
Now, to
Yeah, or should I go ahead with the question?
Smita, hi, am I audible to you?
Yes, Preeti, yes.
Okay, Smita, I just have to make an observation on what Akshita said because I kind of, in principle, don't agree with the two advices that she gave on prevention. Apart from agreeing in everything else she said in principle on the prevention part, but the two things that kind of sounded not very relevant to me, especially in today's age, is first having a no dating policy in any organization. I don't think we can ask any organization to have a no dating policy, even as a guideline also, because people have all the right to decide whom they date, whom they want to be with, sexually, romantically, otherwise. The only thing that organization can advise people is to disclose the same to them, especially if they are dating somebody with whom they are into a power dynamic kind of a relationship. This is what the only advice I believe, in my knowledge, you can give to the organization, especially in terms of the prevention. Otherwise, on papers, we cannot have any form of a no dating policy. Number one. Number two, what I think what Akshita said is about having a dress code in organization, which you said only as an advice you would want to give to the organization. I again find, Akshita, I'm very sorry for that, but I find again this advice to be coming out from a very strongly patriarchal mindset where we feel that a dress code is something which can stop people or which can act as a deterrent for people to respect somebody or harass somebody. You know, we need, especially in today's age and time, we need to move beyond advices which ask people, both men and women, in fact, I'm not saying only women, both men and women, to go beyond the clutches of how one person is dressed up or who he or she is dating, what is their sexual orientation, so on and so forth, and understand simply one thing, that both men and women and the third gender including, because we are not in fact even talking about them, that all of us at a workplace are equal human beings, irrespective of whom we date and what we wear. This is my only observation here.
Yeah, Preeti, I totally agree with what you say, and therefore I had just mentioned it that I will get a lot of criticism regarding mentioning the dress code and everything, but I had just very specifically said that, you know, it's a kind of code of conduct which should be there, and there is no harm. I'm not saying that there's an inappropriate or an appropriate way of dressing. I was just suggesting that there should be a professional way of dressing, right? Of coming into a workplace and maintaining
No,
the decorum of the environment,
no,
right?
I agree. I am understanding your intent. I'm not questioning your intent. See, even there also, because when, especially person like you and everybody else on the panel, people, those who have those words, people take, you know, as an advice coming, or people, those whose word is taken as an expert opinion. So what happens sometimes, these opinions are not taken in the right intent, Akshita. I'm telling you, being somebody who's working in the similar field for last 10 years. So
Yeah.
what I have seen happening is that people try to, especially organizations, employers and senior CEOs and HRs also, somehow take these expert opinion as a watermark, that something that they have to do, because if they do that, then maybe the harassment can be stopped. Apart from the job where the occupation requires you to be in a certain kind of a dress code because of the safety reasons, I think people should be allowed. In fact, people should be encouraged to come into whatever dress they want to wear, you know. And at the same time, everybody else should be encouraged that, irrespective of what anybody is wearing in the organization, your
Preeti, I have a
That is
Preeti,
what I
Preeti, I have
mentioned in
a
first
Preeti,
place,
I have
that yeah.
Akshita, I have a point of view at what Preeti is saying. Preeti, I recently, after the lockdown, there were a couple of cases reported. One of it was that while online, one of the manager was shirtless. He was not wearing any
Exactly. I
clothing
was
on the
about to quote that.
top. Okay, it was a man. Okay, not wearing any clothing. This was an unacceptable code. Okay, which I feel women found it very embarrassing to even face, and they couldn't, even if they put their video off, they couldn't put his video off, right? I think what Akshita is trying to say is that in a professional decorum, the dress code should be called out, okay? If you are working, right, I understand we come in the startup era where when we walk across to a WeWork or something, people come in shorts and dresses, that is their decorum, and if they are fine with it, go ahead. But then when we can ask a question to a man saying, how can you come shirtless? Okay, and women have as a woman, I have a right saying, what are you doing? Go wear a shirt. I think that way we should also maintain our dress code. It is important. Okay.
Smita, as I said, it's meant for both. And number, being
Yeah.
shirtless and wearing a t-shirt is a different thing. Having
Yes.
no clothes and having
No,
clothes
no,
which may not
but that is
suit
the thing,
somebody
Preeti,
else's.
that has to be appreciated, because now the virtual. This is what I was about to quote. I would add into what Smita ma'am had said, that we have received the complaints of virtual sexual harassment, right? So the companies have come up with SOPs that you are supposed to have a plain background. You're not supposed to have any kind of inappropriate hangings or something of that sort in your background. You're
Exactly,
supposed to
Akshita.
dress
That's the point. See,
properly. So that is a
that's the
strict
point. Those
code
are
of conduct, what I
inappropriate.
was
Okay.
referring to,
Those who are
Preeti.
sexually inappropriate. My only point here. See, I'm
I
saying I'm
have
understanding your
That is there.
intent.
That is
My
there. That
only
is
point
what
here
I'm
is
trying to
this.
say.
Yes, I
That is
understand, but I'm saying my only intent here to call this out is this: that when we put a dress code as a code of conduct in written, in writing, in an organization manual, that is something personally I do not encourage, and I would not want anybody to
that
follow
I
per se.
agree, Preeti.
Yeah.
That can be your personal opinion. I totally agree. But we speak from the end of the.
Smita, may I request that we move away from the dress code and come back to the actual harassment
Yes.
that happens in many other
I have
ways?
I have some views on prevention, if I may be allowed to speak.
Yes. Yes, Joe, go ahead.
See, when you talk about prevention, you must know what causes sexual harassment. As I began my speech, the root cause of sexual harassment is not in all cases sex or sexuality. There are basically three reasons for which a woman is sexually harassed. One is to victimize her, to demoralize her and throw her out. That is one reason. Second reason is that the person who is victimizing him or harassing him, he has got a deranged or immoral kind of mentality. That is the second reason. Third reason is that the woman herself, she is not conducting well, and she is behaving in a suggestive manner. Such things are quite common. She might be having an agenda to behave in a suggestive manner to trap somebody, and such cases are quite on the rise. So these basic three reasons are there. In the first reason, deliberately trying to victimize, throw her out, demoralize her, the reason is not sexual. And in such a situation, no dress code works, nothing works. You have to go to the root cause. What is the exact reason? It's not mere sexual harassment, there is something more to it. Second aspect is morally deranged or pervert mentality of men or women or whoever is the predator in the scenario. In these two situations, the prevention can come by knowing the solution, by knowing the cause, and trying to, by awareness or by sensitization, sensitizing the person by making them undergo such discussions to make them realize and empathize what a woman undergoes when she is sexually harassed. You might be having a a stake of rupees 50,000, but what you are attacking on her, by your attack she is losing countless countless amount of unquantifiable amount of damage. This that person should be able to understand and empathize. And for these first and second characters, what you require is educating them, training them by holding regular seminars in the workplaces, etc., etc. And for the third category is concerned, men should knowingly avoid such women. If a woman is deliberately acting like a femme fatale, then the man should should act smart. And I'm sorry if I am having if my view is sounding quite sexist, but what I'm saying is a real scenario. Such things are there. Now coming back to the topic which you were discussing on dress code. Now, as far as dress code is concerned, yes, there is a special code for each calling and profession. For an interview, you are supposed to wear a particular dress code. If you're at head of the organization, you are supposed to dress up, to behave such a position. If, but there is another. It's all about dress code. If it is because a woman is not dressing appropriately that such things are taking place. What about what you have to say about the armed forces? Our women in uniform, are they not suffering or facing such kind of harassments? So I feel that we must have a look at educating them by awareness programs. Like I'm quite sure that many of the persons who attended this uh, talk of ours may not be knowing that we're not probably knowing that that the issue is so serious. When they were teasing a woman with the rest of their peer members, they were not realizing that this is such a serious issue. This is what I have to say in short.
Thank you,
Awareness should
Joe.
be there. They should know that what they're doing is wrong.
Yes, perfect, Joe. Awareness is important. Whether
Yes.
every organization should come with their set of policies, which is agreeable to them as an employer, as employees. I have Jaya has been asking this question, and she asked me a couple of times. So I know we are running short of time. She's asking, can ICC of a parent company adjudicate on a proceeding involving employees of a subsidiary company if subsidiary company doesn't have 10 or more employees?
Yes, they can. There is no bar in law to do it. Law doesn't debar them. Law doesn't restrict them from doing it.
From not doing it.
What the law says that, yes, what the law says is in every company which has got minimum 10 employees, there is a mandate you are duty bound to do. And if you are a company which do not have 10 employees, then as a matter of duty you have to do, moral duty which comes from you, not imposed by law. Law says that if you have minimum 10, you have to do it.
Then the local
But
committee.
if you are a good citizen, then you can do it.
The provision of local committee. There is also a local
Yes, sir.
committee, LC. So complaint can be referred to the local committee.
Yes, yes.
Do you recommend
Yes,
going
yes.
to the local
That's there.
committee,
That provision is there.
do you recommend going to the local committee, or do you recommend the principal employer to do it?
No, when there is no mandate, I mean, if the minimum requirement for a mandate is not there, then the principal employer is not. If the principal employer is not bound, then you can go to the local committee. There is no
So
restriction
principal
on the
employer wants to take. Sorry, Joe. My question is, if the principal employer wants to take, they can take it, right?
In the constitution of the committee, you see how many persons are required to be in the committee. Then the constitution of the committee itself will be illegal. There should be certain number of persons in the committee. Therefore, there is a provision for local committee.
Absolutely. Thank you. That Jaya has been asking this question for a really long time. So I thought I should bring it up to all of you.
Yeah.
Anybody else who wants to unmute and ask question, or should I read it from my question list?
Ma'am, this is Swapnil. I would like to ask question.
I have one question. Okay. So Swapnil first. I'll ask then. Yes, Swapnil, please go on.
But my question is that time by time the crime is increasing continuously. So who is responsible for that? And apart from doing agitation and step taken by so many organizations, so many prostitution house and other organization running so that harassment is continuously running out? And second question, humanity is the main ground for giving any punishment, or crucial punishment is always be suitable for the sexual harassment?
Most important thing. Okay.
Go ahead, Joe.
I'll try to. Yeah. The most important thing in such cases is there should be a complainant who is turning up with guts to say, yes, I have been harassed. And there should be a witness who is willing to support the victim. Yes, I saw it. Once these two things are done, then conviction is imminent. And if there are many such cases, more such cases of good conviction, then then there is nothing which can prevent us from achieving our goals. In your question, I do not understand why you spoke about prostitution. Prostitution, what connection it has with this?
Because
we are talking about sexual harassment.
Because sir, so
may I have clarification? Hello, may I have a clarification on this?
Because sir, we are seeing so many prostitution house running in so many metro cities in like Bangalore and Kolkata openly it's happening, and Mumbai.
Have you ever complained against them? Have you ever complained against them?
So sir, the complaint is raising, but there is no consideration by the government. They are running under the license, sir. So
have you ever complained?
Yeah, Mr. Joe, I see the question is based on the Indian Penal Code and not on the sexual harassment of women at workplace. So I don't think the discussion or the question is relevant.
Can I ask the question, please, now? I think my question would be concerned with Mr. Aditya, as he raised the point. Well, first of all, I'm Neha from Jaipur, and I come from a decade-long corporate experience in multinationals, and now I am working as a POS trainer enabler. And secondly, somebody said, Mr. Prakash, I think talked about, or I think Joe sir talked about Rajasthan and Bhavri Devi case. So I would like to let you know, I just stay 60 kilometers away from Bhavri Devi. So I might plan for an interview with her also. This is how it is, and plays on social media or something like that. So I was just planning it quite some time back that I'll do it now. Well, coming to my question is that Aditya said that we have to write 6 copies, yeah, and place it. Now, first question, who the 6 copies are to be placed, number 1. Number 2, now since everything is happening virtually, the complaints are also coming through emails virtually, and the resolution is also given through emails. IC committee meetings and everything is happening on virtual web platforms. Now, whom the email to be marked as copy or as 2 directly when raising a complaint? These 2 are the questions.
Okay. Can I take that question, Aditya? Yeah. I really want to take that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when the lawmakers made this, I think they were thinking of paper and pen complaints. Okay. Gone are those days. We are email driven. But when they thought about it, what I think they said about 6 copies was that 1 will be her own copy, which she'll be acknowledged and given back to her. 1 will be given to the respondent with the notice of hearing. Okay. And assuming that there will be 4 IC members who will get 1 copy each. So I think that was the idea of giving 6 copies in written, 6 copies of the complaint. But gone are those days. Now email, 1 email, everybody gets it. So I think it has lost its relevance, is what I think from the non-lawyer background. Now I'll let
absolutely agree with you, because these rules were formed in 2013. Now let the pandemic go. I think we'll have sort of an amendment in those rules in 2021. You don't know whether you can submit it in a digital form, because now the culture of work from home and everything has been increased, and it'll come. But see, as I told, I started my thing from 1997. The definition in the Vishaka case was such a narrow. Over a passage of time and over a period of time, the scope broaden up. So the acts are usually when they are. So the law will evolve. The amendment might come. But this is what I told, that 6 copies and everything. These are the rules which are laid down in 2013. Based on the current scenario, yes. Now, as per the General Clauses Act, you are supposed to deliver the notice by registered post or some other. Now, even courts have gone to that extent that you can also deliver the summons through WhatsApp or Telegram. So it will evolve over the period of time. But this is what has been given in the 2013 rules.
So
We
is
have
the
actually
email
done Aditya on WhatsApp. We have actually given summons on WhatsApp to a live case where we did not have email address or her home address to deliver the summons. So we have done that.
Yeah. So it has evolved.
Are the emails considered as official way of communicating?
WhatsApp
these
is
copies?
considered. Emails is anyways an official communication. I'm saying even WhatsApp is considered. The blue ticks are saved and kept as a record.
And only to the presiding officer or to each and every member of committee whom it should be sent to, or HR should be in copy. I mean, who should be there in the mail?
No, HR and everyone you don't have. You have to give it to either the presiding officer or any of the committee member. HR and everything you don't have to serve them a copy.
Neha, HR is not even called out in the law. If you look at it, HR doesn't have any relevance in the law. Okay, it is employer and it is the IC. It is the presiding officer, right? So ideally, the complaint has to be given to presiding officer. She's the first person who receives it. Okay, but we have evolved. Now there is a common ID of like posh@xyz.com that has come up. We have also evolved. Organizations have evolved. So new technology, new ways of dealing with it. Yeah. So that's how about it. We are exactly at 8:29. I quickly want to wrap this up. I think we had such amazing discussion with the 4 eminent folks. And thank you very much for all the participants for staying with us. We had 70+ participants listening to us, and I hope each one of you has at least taken one feedback. This is available on Facebook. If you can go ahead and put your feedback on this. We will, KELP-HR and ILA will be continuously doing these webinars to keep on responding to. I still see a lot of questions coming up. Unfortunately, we are like just in time, 1.5 hours. It just flew. Thank you very, very much. Madhura, would you want to have any closing comments, or any of the panelists wants to have any closing comments?
This was a very nice seminar. We should hold such seminars. Thank you very much.
Surely, Mr. Thopatkar. So once again, thank you to all the panelists for coming forward, sharing their knowledge, experiences on this topic. And Smita, a big thank you to you for moderating this session, which, brought the best out of interactions on this topic. To our audiences, thank you for joining us this evening. If any of us would want to be a speaker or share your experience, please feel free to reach out to us. Or if you want to volunteer with ILA or contribute on the board of a chapter in your city, then also you could just reach out to us. We are very active on our social media handles. And thank you once again for joining. Wish you a Shubharatri.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Smita, for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye bye.
Bye-bye.